Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at a virus you might not have heard much about.
Right.
It's called human metapneumovirus, or hMPV for short.
Yeah.
And to guide our deep dive today,
Well,
we're going to be looking at an excerpt from a recent article titled Human Metapneumovirus, hMPV Outbreak, Understanding the Threat.
okay. Okay.
So
Mhm.
this deep dive is going to be pretty interesting because this virus it's more common than you might think,
Right.
but it's also pretty new to science.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
One of the things that's so interesting about hMPV is just how widespread it is.
Okay.
It accounts for
Oh.
like a staggering 5 to 10%
Okay.
of all respiratory infections worldwide.
That is a huge number.
Yeah.
I mean, just to put that into perspective, that puts it right up there with the flu in terms of how many people it affects every year.
Yeah.
And yet, most people have never even heard of it.
Yeah. And part of that is
Yeah.
because it was only discovered in 2001.
Well,
So, we're really
oh,
talking about a relatively new player
okay.
on the global health stage.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
2001, that's not that long ago.
No, it's not.
So are we just getting better at identifying it, or was it really not around before then?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
And scientists believe that it probably has been circulating for much longer.
Okay.
We just didn't have the tools to identify it before.
Okay.
And so it's possible that it was misdiagnosed
Right.
as other respiratory illnesses.
Interesting. Okay.
So even though it's new to science,
Yeah.
it's probably been around for
Right.
quite some time.
Okay, so it's been hiding in the shadows,
Kind of. Yeah.
and now it's emerging as a potential threat. All right, so we've established that hMPV is pretty common, it's relatively new to science, but what exactly is it? What are we dealing with here?
Well, hMPV belongs to a family
Okay.
of viruses called the Paramyxoviridae family.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
Paramyxoviridae.
But what's interesting is that this family also includes some viruses that we're all familiar with.
Like what?
RSV,
Okay.
parainfluenza.
Yeah,
These are all viruses that are known
right.
to cause respiratory infections, especially in kids.
So basically we're talking about like a family of respiratory troublemakers.
Kinda, yeah. You can
Okay.
think about it that way.
If hMPV is the newest member.
Yeah, the newest member of the family.
Okay. All right. So if hMPV is part of this respiratory infection family, as we're calling it,
Mhm.
how does it spread?
Well, it spreads pretty much the same way
Okay.
that those other viruses spread,
Yep.
respiratory droplets.
So like when someone coughs or sneezes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Close contact, touching surfaces that are
Duh.
contaminated with the virus.
Makes sense.
And like other respiratory viruses.
Yeah.
hMPV tends to peak
Okay.
in the late winter and spring,
So it's following the same playbook as
pretty much.
the flu and RSV. Okay, so we're talking about the same transmission routes.
Right.
Are the symptoms similar?
In many cases, yes.
Yeah.
You might see some of the same kind of mild
Okay.
cold-like symptoms that you would see with
Okay.
other respiratory viruses.
For like
Runny nose,
cough. Right.
sore throat,
Yeah.
maybe a fever.
Okay, so pretty standard stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
But here's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Okay.
For some people,
Yeah.
hMPV can actually be much more serious.
Okay, so now I'm getting a little nervous.
Yeah.
When you say more serious, what do you mean?
Well,
What kind of complications are we talking about?
it can lead to things like bronchiolitis,
Okay.
pneumonia,
Yeah.
even respiratory failure
Wow. Okay.
in some cases.
So this is definitely not something to take lightly.
No, it's not.
So who's most at risk for these more serious complications?
Well, it's basically the same groups
Okay.
that are vulnerable
Yeah.
to most respiratory viruses.
Okay.
So we're talking about infants,
Okay.
especially those under 6 months. Older adults
Yeah.
and anyone with a weakened immune system.
Makes sense.
These are the groups where hMPV can really hit hard.
So it's really important to be aware of this virus, especially if you're in one of those vulnerable groups or if you're caring for someone who is.
Exactly.
Okay, so given that it was only discovered a couple of decades ago,
Yeah.
what kind of impact are we seeing from hMPV on a global scale?
Well, remember that 5 to 10% of all respiratory infections globally,
Yeah.
that translates to millions
Wow.
of people being affected by hMPV
Okay.
every single year.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It is.
And you said those numbers have been surging lately.
Yeah, we've actually seen a significant spike
Okay.
in hMPV cases in 2023.
Okay, so is this just because we're better at detecting it now?
Potentially.
Or is there something else going on?
Well, researchers believe that it's likely a combination of factors.
Okay.
Increased testing,
Okay.
especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's definitely helped us identify more cases.
Right, yeah.
But they also believe that the pandemic itself might have played a role.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, how could the pandemic, with all the lockdowns and the social distancing, how could that have contributed to a rise in hMPV cases?
Well, think about it.
Yeah.
All those measures that we took during the pandemic,
Okay.
they really limited our exposure to a lot of common viruses,
Yeah.
including hMPV.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
what researchers think happened is that it created sort of an immunity gap.
Okay, so our immune systems were like on vacation.
Kinda. Yeah.
And then when we all went back out into the world,
Yeah.
hMPV was like, hey, I'm back.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
So in a way, the pandemic might have inadvertently made us more susceptible to this virus.
Yeah, potentially.
Wow, okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So how can you tell if you have hMPV? I mean, is it just a matter of checking for a fever, or do you need like a specific test?
Yeah, distinguishing hMPV from other respiratory illnesses
Okay.
based on symptoms alone can be very tricky.
Right, because it sounds like a lot of the symptoms overlap
Exactly.
with other common
Yeah.
respiratory viruses.
Yeah.
So how do we know for sure?
Luckily, we do have some diagnostic tools
Okay.
that can help us pinpoint whether or not
Yeah.
it's hMPV.
Okay, so let's talk about those tools.
So the gold standard
Yeah.
is something called PCR testing.
Okay.
And this type of testing, it detects the virus's genetic material.
Okay.
So it's very accurate.
So that's like the most reliable way
That's the most reliable way. Yeah.
to know for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there other options if PCR testing's not available?
We also have something called antigen tests.
Okay.
Antigen tests are faster.
Okay.
They're often used in clinics
Okay.
for a kind of quick initial assessment,
Okay.
but they're not quite as sensitive
Okay.
as PCR testing.
So PCR is still the most reliable.
PCR is still the gold standard.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say you get tested.
Mm-hmm.
You find out you have hMPV. What's next?
What happens then?
Yeah, what's the treatment protocol? Is there like a specific antiviral medication for this virus?
Unfortunately, not yet.
Okay.
There are no antiviral medications
Got it.
specifically approved
Okay.
for hMPV treatment.
Okay, so no magic bullet.
No magic bullet,
So
unfortunately.
what does that mean for people who are infected? What can they do?
Well, currently the focus is on supportive care.
Okay.
So that means managing the symptoms,
Okay.
providing relief,
Okay.
making sure that the person's comfortable.
Okay, so if there's no specific treatment, what does that supportive care look like?
So for mild cases,
Okay.
it's a lot like how you would manage a cold.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
rest
It's
fluids,
very-
over-the-counter medications for fever
Yeah.
and aches and pains.
Okay. Pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, pretty standard stuff.
Okay.
But for severe cases,
Okay.
especially in those vulnerable groups we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
it can involve oxygen therapy, hydration support,
Okay.
even hospitalization
Okay.
if the person needs ventilatory support.
Wow. So it sounds like the severity of this virus can really vary
Yeah, it can.
depending on the individual
Exactly.
and their overall health.
Yeah,
Okay, so if there's no specific treatment yet, what about prevention?
right.
Are there things that people can do to reduce their risk of getting infected with hMPV in the first place?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the good news is
Yeah.
that a lot of these strategies are things that we've become very familiar with,
Okay.
especially over the past few years.
You're talking about those simple but powerful hygiene practices that
Yeah.
we all learned during the pandemic?
Yeah. Things like
Yeah.
frequent hand washing,
Okay.
covering your coughs and sneezes,
Yeah.
cleaning
For
surfaces.
cleaning surfaces.
These are all very effective
Okay.
ways to prevent the spread of hMPV.
So it's a good reminder that those basic hygiene habits are still our best defense, not just against hMPV, but against a whole range of infectious diseases.
Exactly.
It's like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
That's right.
And in this case, since there's no cure yet,
Yeah.
prevention is even more important.
It is.
Okay, so those simple everyday actions
Mhm.
can have a huge impact on preventing the spread.
They can.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what about the future? Is there hope for a vaccine on the horizon?
There is.
Okay,
There is.
that's great to hear.
While no vaccine exists yet,
Okay.
research is showing a lot of promise.
Okay.
Scientists are drawing inspiration
Okay.
from the technologies
Yeah.
that were used to develop vaccines
Okay.
for RSV
Okay.
and for COVID-19.
Right.
and they're looking at ways to adapt those approaches.
So we're building on the successes of other vaccine developments
Exactly.
to tackle this new virus.
Exactly.
That's encouraging.
It is.
Okay.
So with continued research and investment,
Yeah.
a vaccine for hMPV could be a real game changer.
That's fantastic news.
Yeah, it is.
But are there challenges ahead?
There are.
What are some of the main hurdles that scientists are facing?
One of the biggest challenges is simply a lack of awareness.
Okay.
A lot of people haven't even heard of hMPV,
Right.
and so that makes it harder
Yeah.
to advocate for research funding
Right.
and for public health initiatives.
So we need to get the word out.
We do.
We need to raise awareness
Yeah.
about this virus.
Absolutely.
Okay. And what about resource constraints? I mean, are those a factor as well?
Resource constraints are always a factor,
Yeah.
particularly in developing countries,
Right.
where access to things like
Yeah.
diagnostic tools,
Yeah.
treatment facilities,
Right.
even basic healthcare infrastructure can be limited.
Right. So even if we develop a vaccine,
Yeah,
we need to make sure that it reaches
we do.
the people who need it most,
Exactly.
no matter where they live.
Exactly.
Okay, and then of course there's the potential for,
Yeah.
new, more challenging strains
Right.
to emerge.
Viruses are constantly evolving,
Yeah,
so we need to be prepared
right.
for the possibility
Yeah.
that new variants
Yeah.
could emerge.
It's like a constant arms race
Kinda, yeah.
between science and
Uh-huh.
the virus,
Right.
so we can't let our guard down.
No.
Okay, so with all that in mind,
Uh-huh.
what can we as individuals,
Yeah.
what can we do to contribute to the fight against this emerging global health threat?
Well, first and foremost,
Yeah.
stay informed.
Okay.
The more you know about hMPV,
Right.
the better equipped you'll be
Yeah.
to protect yourself and others.
Right.
And don't underestimate the power of those simple hygiene practices I
Yes.
talked about.
The hand washing, that covering your cough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those things really do make a difference.
And I think it's also important to advocate for
Yeah.
continued research and global cooperation.
Absolutely.
We need to make sure that resources are directed
We do.
towards developing new vaccines,
Yeah.
treatments, diagnostic tools,
Huh.
and that those resources reach everyone
Yes.
who needs them,
Yeah.
regardless of where they live.
I completely agree.
Okay, well, this has been incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
We've learned so much about hMPV,
Uh-huh.
where it came from,
Yeah.
how it spreads,
Mhm.
who's most at risk, and
Yeah.
what the future holds
Yeah.
for prevention and treatment.
Absolutely.
It's clear that while there are challenges ahead,
Yeah.
there's also reason for hope.
There is.
And we'll be back after a short break
Okay.
to delve even deeper into the world of hMPV research
Sounds good.
and explore the potential of cutting-edge technologies
Oh.
like artificial intelligence.
All right.
Stay tuned.
Okay. Welcome back to our deep dive into human metapneumovirus.
Before the break, we were talking about the potential for hMPV to evolve and for new strains to emerge. And that got me thinking, is this something that scientists are actively monitoring?
Yeah.
I mean, we've all seen what happened with COVID-19
Right.
and the emergence of new variants.
Yeah.
Is that something that we need to be worried about with hMPV as well?
That's a great question. And
Yeah.
yes, researchers are definitely keeping a very close eye on hMPV
Okay.
and how it's changing,
Okay.
because viruses, by their very nature,
Right.
are constantly mutating. It's part of their survival strategy.
Okay.
So as hMPV spreads,
Yeah.
its genetic code can undergo slight changes.
So it's like a game of genetic telephone
Exactly.
where the message changes slightly with each whisper.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, but are all of these mutations cause for concern?
Well, most of them
Right.
are actually harmless.
Okay.
Some might even weaken the virus,
Okay.
but every now and then
Yeah.
a mutation pops up
Okay.
that gives the virus an advantage,
Okay.
maybe making it more transmissible or helping it evade our immune system.
Okay, now that's a little concerning.
Yeah.
Are we talking about like a scenario where hMPV could suddenly become
Right.
much more dangerous, like a super virus?
It's always a possibility with viruses, but I
Wow.
think it's important not to jump
Yeah.
to worst case scenarios.
Okay.
Scientists are constantly
Yeah.
tracking hMPV's genetic changes.
Okay.
They're studying its behavior in different populations,
Uh-huh.
looking for any red flags
Okay.
that might suggest that a more threatening strain is emerging.
So it's like a global surveillance network
Yeah.
constantly monitoring hMPV
Exactly.
for any signs of trouble.
Precisely.
And if a worrisome mutation does appear, are scientists prepared to counter it?
Yeah, they are.
Oh, and
They're already working on strategies to
Nice.
counter it.
Okay.
This could involve
Yeah.
adapting existing vaccines or treatments,
Okay.
or even creating new ones
Yeah.
that are specifically designed to target
Okay.
that mutated strain.
So it's like a constant arms race
That's a great analogy.
between science and the virus.
It is a very dynamic process
Okay.
that demands constant vigilance
Okay.
and innovation from the scientific community.
Okay, so speaking of innovation,
Right?
before the break, we touched on the hope for a vaccine for hMPV.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us a bit more about the research
Yeah.
that's happening in that area? What are scientists working on right now?
There are actually several promising avenues of research that are
Okay.
being explored.
Okay.
Some scientists are building on the success of the RSV vaccine,
Okay.
which was recently approved
Okay.
for use in infants and older adults,
Right.
and adapting that technology
Right.
to target hMPV.
So taking the lessons learned from the fight against RSV
Exactly.
and applying them to hMPV.
Exactly.
Okay, are there other approaches being looked at as well?
Yes. So other researchers are exploring
Okay.
different vaccine platforms, like the mRNA vaccines that have been so effective
Right.
against COVID-19.
mRNA vaccines have definitely made a name for themselves over the past few years.
They have, and for good reason.
So potentially we could see an mRNA vaccine for hMPV in the future.
It's definitely
Sure.
within the realm of possibility.
That's exciting.
It is.
What about, are there other types of vaccines besides mRNA that are being researched?
Yeah, there are a couple of other approaches that are being explored.
Okay.
One is something called subunit vaccines.
Okay.
And these vaccines, they use only specific parts of the virus
Okay.
to trigger an immune response.
Okay.
And then there are also
Yeah.
live attenuated vaccines,
Okay.
which use a weakened version of the virus.
So there's a whole arsenal of vaccine technologies
There is.
being used to tackle this virus.
Yeah, and the research is moving very quickly.
Okay.
So a lot of scientists believe that we'll have an effective vaccine sooner rather than later.
That's great news.
It is.
But a vaccine is just one part of the solution, right?
Right.
We also need effective treatments
We do.
for people who are already infected with hMPV.
Absolutely.
And as we discussed before the break,
Yep.
there aren't any antiviral medications specifically for hMPV yet.
Right.
But what about other treatment approaches?
Yeah.
What are researchers looking into?
So one exciting area of research
Okay.
is the development of monoclonal antibodies.
Okay.
Now, these are lab-made antibodies
Okay.
that can target specific proteins on the virus,
Okay.
neutralizing it and preventing it from infecting cells.
Monoclonal antibodies have been used to treat other viral infections, haven't they?
Yes, they have.
I remember hearing about them
Yeah.
being used for COVID-19.
You're right.
So how do they work?
Well, they basically give our immune systems a boost
Okay.
with these targeted antibodies.
So it's like we're giving our bodies a little extra help
Exactly.
to fight off the virus.
Ex-
And are monoclonal antibodies the only promising treatment approach being researched?
No, there's another area of research
Okay.
that's focused on repurposing existing antiviral drugs.
Okay.
So these are medications
Yeah.
that are already approved
Okay.
for other conditions
Okay.
and seeing if they might also be effective
Okay.
against hMPV.
So it's like a treasure hunt,
Ha! I like that analogy.
searching for hidden potential
Yeah,
among existing drugs.
exactly.
And if they find a match, does that speed up the process of getting a treatment to market?
It can significantly speed up the process
Okay.
because the drug has already
Right.
undergone rigorous safety testing.
Right. It's already been approved.
Exactly.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
It sounds like finding new uses for existing medications could be a faster route to developing treatments for hMPV.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But what about new drug development?
Yeah.
Is there research focused on creating antivirals specifically designed for this virus?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Scientists are working to identify
Okay.
key proteins or enzymes
Okay.
that are essential
Yeah.
for hMPV's replication.
Okay.
And once they've pinpointed these vital components,
Yeah.
they can design drugs
Okay.
that block their function.
So it's like finding the virus's Achilles heel
That's a great way to put it.
and then creating a weapon to exploit that weakness.
Exactly. It's a complex process.
Right.
But it holds immense potential for developing
Yeah.
highly effective treatments for hMPV.
It's incredible to see the amount of research and innovation
It is.
that's being dedicated to tackling this virus.
It is.
You know, something that often gets overlooked in these scientific discussions is the role of artificial intelligence.
Right.
We've seen AI make incredible strides in medicine lately.
Yeah.
Is AI playing a role in hMPV research as well?
It absolutely is.
Okay.
AI is being used
Okay,
at
yeah.
all sorts of stages of research,
Okay.
from drug discovery
Okay.
to disease surveillance
Huh?
to personalized medicine. It's really transforming
Good.
how we approach hMPV
Okay.
and other health challenges.
That's fascinating.
It is.
Can you give us some specific examples
Yeah.
of how AI is being used to tackle hMPV?
One area where AI is having a huge impact
Okay.
is in drug discovery.
Okay.
Now, traditional drug development
Right.
is notoriously time-consuming and expensive.
Yeah, it could take years, even decades,
It can.
to bring a new drug to market.
It can.
It's a long and arduous process.
It is.
So how is AI changing that?
Well, AI algorithms
Okay.
can analyze
Okay.
massive data sets.
Okay.
Things like
Yeah.
genetic sequences,
Okay.
protein structures,
Uh-huh.
clinical trial results
Okay.
to identify
Okay.
potential drug candidates
Okay.
much faster than humans can.
So it's like having a super-powered research assistant
Exactly.
that can sift through mountains of data in the
Yeah.
blink of an eye.
Exactly.
And AI can also help predict which drug candidates are most likely to be effective.
Yes, it can.
And safe.
And safe.
So that reduces the risk of those costly and time-consuming failures
Exactly.
in clinical trials.
Right.
That's a game changer for drug development.
It is.
But is AI only being used for discovering brand new drugs?
Not at all.
Okay.
AI is also being used to repurpose
Okay.
existing medications.
Uh-huh.
Like we talked about earlier.
Right.
AI algorithms can analyze
Okay.
the molecular structures of drugs
Okay.
and compare them to the structure of hMPV proteins
Okay.
to see if there's a match.
It's like a matchmaking service
I like that.
for drugs and viruses.
That's a great analogy.
Okay. And if they find a match,
Yeah,
it could potentially fast-track the availability of treatments.
it could.
And the applications of AI go beyond drug discovery as well, right?
Yes, they do.
What about things like disease surveillance and outbreak prediction?
AI is also being used to improve disease surveillance
Okay.
and outbreak prediction.
Okay, so how does AI help with that?
Well, AI algorithms can analyze data from all sorts of sources.
Okay.
Electronic health records,
Okay.
social media posts,
Wow.
even weather patterns.
So it's like having a global early warning system for infectious diseases.
That's a great way to think about it.
That's amazing.
It is.
I can see how that would be incredibly valuable for public health officials.
It is.
It allows them to allocate resources more effectively,
Yeah.
implement targeted interventions,
Right.
and communicate with the public more proactively.
Exactly.
So AI is playing a critical role
It is.
in both the scientific and public health responses to hMPV.
It is.
And I think it's safe to say that we're just scratching the surface
Yeah, I think so.
of what AI can do in this field.
I agree.
As AI technology continues to advance,
Yeah.
we can expect to see even more innovative applications in hMPV research,
Absolutely.
prevention, and treatment.
Absolutely.
It's an exciting time to be following these developments.
It is.
It is.
It-
But, you know, with all this talk about science and technology,
Yeah.
it's important to remember
Right.
the human impact of hMPV.
It is.
We've talked about the science, the statistics, the research,
Right.
but what about the real-world consequences of this virus?
Yeah.
How does it affect people's lives?
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to get caught up
Yeah.
in the scientific details,
Right.
but ultimately it's about people.
Right.
hMPV may be a relatively new virus,
Right.
but it's already having a profound impact on lives around the world.
Can you give us some examples of what that impact looks like?
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges people face when dealing with hMPV?
So for parents of young children,
Okay.
hMPV can be incredibly
Okay.
stressful and anxiety-inducing.
Okay.
You know, infants and toddlers are
Yes.
especially vulnerable
Mhm.
to severe hMPV infections.
Right.
Seeing your child
Yeah.
struggle to breathe
Right.
or
Right.
needing hospitalization.
No.
It's a terrifying experience for any parent.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
And the impact goes beyond just the immediate medical crisis as well, right?
It does.
I mean, parents might have to miss work to
right.
care for their sick child,
Yeah,
leading to financial strain.
absolutely.
They might face long wait times in emergency rooms,
Right.
struggle to find childcare for their other children. It
Well,
can
me too.
disrupt an entire family.
It's a ripple effect
Yeah.
that touches so many aspects of life.
And it's not just young children who are affected, right?
Right, you're right.
What about older adults?
For older adults, hMPV can be
Okay.
equally debilitating.
Okay.
It can lead to pneumonia.
Okay.
It can worsen
Yeah.
existing chronic condition.
Right.
And in some cases, it can even be fatal.
So it's a reminder that hMPV isn't just a childhood illness.
Exactly.
It affects people across the lifespan.
It does.
And what about people with weakened immune systems?
For people with weakened immune systems,
Hmm.
hMPV can be especially dangerous.
Okay.
They might experience more severe symptoms.
Okay.
They might need longer hospital stays.
Mm.
They might face a higher risk of complications.
So it's a reminder that hMPV disproportionately affects the most vulnerable members of our society.
Exactly.
And it underscores the importance of public health measures,
Yeah.
like vaccination and infection control,
Yes.
to protect those who are most at risk.
I couldn't agree more.
We've talked about the personal impact of hMPV,
Uh-huh.
but what about the economic impact?
Right.
Does this virus have broader economic consequences?
It definitely does.
Okay.
Both directly and indirectly.
Okay.
Direct costs
Yeah.
include things like healthcare expenses,
Okay.
hospitalizations,
Yeah.
doctor's visits,
Yeah.
medications.
Okay.
Indirect costs
Okay.
include things like lost productivity
Right.
due to illness and missed work.
So it's not just a health issue.
It's not.
It's an economic issue as well.
Precisely.
And that economic burden falls not just on individuals and families, but on healthcare systems
Right.
and society as a whole.
It does.
This has been a powerful reminder
Yeah.
that behind the science and the statistics,
Yeah.
there are real people
There are.
whose lives are being affected by hMPV.
Yeah.
It's a reminder
Yeah.
of the urgency
Right.
of finding solutions to prevent and treat this virus.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful.
It
It's
has.
covering everything.
Yeah.
From the microscopic world of the virus
Hmm.
to its global impact.
Yeah.
We've explored the latest scientific advancements,
Yeah.
the challenges ahead, and
Wow.
the hope for a future
Yeah.
where hMPV is no longer a threat.
It's been a fascinating journey
It has.
through the world of hMPV.
It has.
And before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I think there's one more crucial aspect
Okay.
that we need to discuss.
Okay.
And that's the role of public awareness and education
Okay.
in the fight against this virus.
That's that.
So we'll talk about that after a quick break.
Sounds good. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been uncovering all the details about human metapneumovirus,
Yeah.
from its structure and how it spreads,
Right.
to the very real impact it has on individuals and healthcare systems.
Oh,
And before the break, we were talking about the critical role of public awareness. You know, it's interesting, with all the advancements in research
Right.
and all the new technology that's becoming available, it's easy to forget
Mhm.
just how important public awareness
It is.
really is in combating
It is.
a health threat like this.
You're absolutely right.
You know, even with the most cutting-edge vaccines
Yeah.
and the most effective treatments,
Right.
those things are only effective
Yeah.
if people know about the virus,
They are.
if they understand the risks,
Right.
and if they
Right.
take steps to protect themselves and others.
Exactly.
So how do we bridge that knowledge gap? How do we get people talking about hMPV?
I think it really requires a team effort. You know, we need healthcare professionals,
Mm-hmm.
public health organizations,
Right.
the media,
Yeah.
and even just everyday individuals all working together to raise awareness.
It's like a collective approach.
It is.
Healthcare providers, they're on the front lines, right?
Right.
They're the ones who are
Yeah.
diagnosing and treating hMPV.
Exactly.
So they're in a prime position
Yeah.
to educate patients
They are.
about the virus and how to prevent it.
They are.
And then we have public health organizations like the CDC
Right.
and the WHO.
Uh-huh.
They're the ones who are conducting the surveillance,
Right.
tracking the outbreaks, and disseminating information.
Right.
They're like the watchdogs,
Yeah.
keeping an eye on hMPV.
Exactly.
And then, of course, the media has a role to play,
Absolutely.
getting the word out, educating the public,
Yeah.
and then social media as well. So
Right.
we can all do our part
We can.
in raising awareness about hMPV.
Absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about the present and even the future of hMPV.
Right.
But what are some of the unanswered questions?
Yeah.
What are scientists still grappling with?
Yeah. That's a great question.
What's on the horizon for research?
One area that's generating a lot of excitement
Okay.
is the development of new diagnostic tools.
Okay.
We talked earlier about how tricky it can be
Yeah.
to diagnose hMPV,
Right.
especially in the early stages because the symptoms are so similar
Yeah.
to other respiratory illnesses.
Right. So there's a real need
There is.
for more accurate and faster tests.
Exactly. Imagine a test They could tell you in minutes
Wow.
whether or not you have hMPV.
Right there in the doctor's office.
Right there in the doctor's office or the emergency room.
That would be amazing.
It would.
So are scientists working on anything like that?
They are.
Okay.
They're exploring some really innovative approaches,
Okay.
like point-of-care tests
Okay.
that could provide results very quickly
Okay.
using just a small sample of blood or saliva.
Wow, that's incredible.
It is.
So beyond diagnostics, what other areas of research are showing promise?
Another fascinating area is research into
Yeah.
the long-term effects of hMPV infection.
Okay.
We've talked about
Right.
the immediate impact.
Yeah.
But what about the long-term consequences?
So are there potential health issues that might develop?
Potentially years later.
Potentially.
Okay, so scientists are looking into that.
Yes, some early studies suggest that hMPV infection in early childhood might be linked to a higher risk of developing asthma or other respiratory conditions later in life.
So it's not just about treating the immediate infection.
Right.
We need to be thinking about the long-term effects as well.
We do.
And of course, there's the ongoing research into the virus itself.
Right.
How it replicates, how it interacts with our immune system.
Exactly. It's all about unraveling the mysteries of this virus.
It's incredible how much effort is being directed
It is.
at this relatively new virus.
It is. It really speaks to the dedication and ingenuity of the scientific community.
It does.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that
What do we want them to remember about hMPV?
hMPV is a common respiratory virus.
Okay.
It can cause serious illness,
Okay.
especially in vulnerable groups.
Right.
But we're not powerless against it.
We can all do our part
We can.
to protect ourselves and our communities.
Exactly. By practicing good hygiene,
Okay.
staying informed,
Staying informed.
and supporting continued research.
And with the promising developments in vaccines and treatments on the horizon,
Yeah,
there's good reason to be hopeful about the future.
there is.
That's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of human metapneumovirus.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay informed.
Stay informed.
And most importantly,
Stay healthy.
stay healthy.